What's poppin', everybody? This is the Cartoon Kid, Ray Rollins, and we're on a channel where we talk cartoons, and we do it every other day, man. Today, we're talking about one of my new favorite cartoons, or should I say, favorite new cartoons, and that is Infinity Train, and we're reviewing season 3 or book 3, whatever you prefer to call it, episode 1, The Musical Car. Now, before I start breaking this episode down, man, I gotta give y'all that episode breakdown. So this episode starts off right in the musical car, obviously. And we see this whole performance, this whole musical going on. And it's a good song, man. I'll give them that. It's a damn good song. But soon as the song ends, the whole little performance getting ready to wrap up, we see the Apex coming in to raid the joint, right? Now, for those of you who don't know, we've seen the Apex in season 2 with Jesse and Tulip, and they were trying to recruit Jesse, and they wanted him to stay on the train with them. And the whole goal of the Apex is just to bring total anarchy to the whole train, man. They hate 1-1, and they completely want to take over the train, if you even want to call it that, right? So when we see them in season 2, they're trying to recruit Jesse, and they wanted Jesse to leave our good old metal homie Tulip, right? But Jesse wasn't going. Jesse basically gets up away from them. But we briefly see them in season 2. And they return here in season 3. And you know what? They're still wreaking anarchy, man. Now, as they're raiding the train, we get to see a little glimpse of the two, I guess you can call them the head honchos or the hefes of the Apex, that being Grace and Simon, alright? Grace, of course, is the #1 leader, as we knew in season 2, but we see a little banter between them. You know, they're talking a little bit as they're getting the whole raid going on, and after they get done basically raiding the joint, they head back to their car, the mall car, which is the Apex's hideout, and we see Grace and Simon have a little bit more back and forth, a little chit chat, and we see a little bit more of a manipulative side of Grace. I'll touch on that a little bit later in the episode. To make a long story short, they decide, the whole Apex, to raid another car, right? And this turns out to be the turtle car. Now, during this raid, the turtle car ends up switching up on them, and Simon ends up getting trapped in the car. Grace has to make a split-second decision. She's like, yo, I gotta save Simon. And she ends up saving him. Obviously, it was no easy feat, because she ends up destroying her harpoon pack in the process, which, I gotta say, man, makes for extremely dope-ass, I wouldn't say combat scenes, but it's some dope-ass visuals to see Grace and Simon and them fly across on the little harpoon things. Like, it's pretty dope. I'm not even gonna lie to you. It's a pretty unique ability that Grace has that I think is pretty dope. So she ends up saving Simon from that changing car, and they ended up getting tossed off the train. So Simon pulls up his little map, little Dragon Ball radar looking thingy, right? And he's looking at it, he's trying to find where everyone else is at. And he finds out that him and Grace are 47 cars away from the mall car, which is obviously, as I said earlier, the Apex's headquarters. So they basically come to the whole conclusion that, yo, we gotta find our way back to them, which means we gotta go through all 47 of these cars. And I just love the whole ending of this episode where Simon is like, yo, man, it's just gonna be like good old times, and Grace is just like, ugh, she ain't ready for it, man. She ain't ready for it. But that was the end of the episode right there. It's honestly, it wasn't a big plot heavy episode. This basically served as the starting of the story, because as we know, Infinity Train is a chronological story. Each episode adds on to the story. It's not one of those, yo, episode 1, okay, 10 minutes of basic nothingness, or not nothingness, but basically one story per episode, and episode 2, we're back to normal. No, it's a chronological story. So this wasn't a very huge episode. I'm going to discuss it more in my review, but let me get on to my first impressions, my overall first impressions of this episode. First, man, I gotta say, Infinity Train has to be one of my favorite newly released cartoons at this moment. It's better than, you know what? I don't want to say it's better than Rick and Morty, but season 4 of Rick and Morty was kind of a little disaster, you know? Not every episode was gold, but Infinity Train has always been good to me. Even the kind of the dull episodes, but they have their own purposes. Season 1 was damn good. Season 2 was phenomenal. I don't know if I pretty much enjoyed it more because I watched it back to back, like every single episode, instead of watched it week per week as I did with Rick and Morty. But Season 2 was absolutely phenomenal. And the first episode of Season 3 seems to be good. It has a good lead up. But my overall first impression of this series, and it's kind of a thing that I necessarily don't like, but it has its own purpose, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. But the thing that I loved in this episode, or this season rather, is that it started off showing us the apex. One thing that I never necessarily liked about Infinity Train was that each season we switched protagonists. First, season 1 was about regular Tulip Olsen, right? Season 2 was about her reflection, and I guess you could say Jesse too, because they both served as the main protagonists of Season 2. Now, what I like about this episode, or this season rather, is that it's revisiting the Apex, which when me and my buddy Alex were reviewing the end of Season 2, we were like, yo, it'll be cool if they brought back the Apex, or they do a season with the Apex trying to get off the train or something like that, or it'll be cool if they revisit them, which it appears that they're doing at this point right now. But if you've seen the trailer, you know the season also follows a little girl and her ape friend Tuba. So when we're gonna meet them in episode 2 rather, the Jungle Car. But it was pretty cool just to see some people that we've seen in season 2. It's like, oh yeah, I know these guys, the Apex. So it's not like we're getting introduced to 100% brand new characters. We have some throwback characters from season 2. And with season 1, I didn't necessarily like the fact that, there was no mention of any of the characters from season 1. We saw the donut holder guy in I guess you could say the midpoint of season 2. And we also saw 1-1 nearing the end of the season, but where was the dog at? Where was Atticus at? And obviously, there was no mention of Tulip Olsen, but, that's completely understandable because she's off the train. Like, why does she need to be mentioned? But that was my first impression, man. I was like, oh man, it's dope as hell to see the Apex. So, with all that being said, let's go on to some of my favorite moments of this episode. The main thing that I really enjoyed about this episode is that, obviously, since this appears to be revolving around the Apex, we're going to see the main two characters, Simon and Grace, who are, as I said earlier, the jefes or the head honchos of the Apex. And it's like, the banter between these two completely does its job. And the main job for the whole banter is that, you want to show that these two are very close friends, man. That's what you want to showcase. And you gotta like how the fact when they're in the music car and they're joking about their numbers and whatnot, and she's like, oh yeah, Mr. Socks with Sandals, kind of throwing a little dig at our blonde ponytail homie about him wearing socks and sandals. And it's like, you know what? She kind of don't dig at me too, because I done that sometimes, man. Listen, if you go into a grocery store or something, right, it be cold as hell up in there sometimes, so it won't hurt to have some socks on your sandal, or socks on with your sandals. So I can see where my buddy Simon's coming from. But there was another instance in there where he makes a reference to him writing a fantasy novel, and he was like, you supposed to read it, man. You promised you would read it. And she's like, man, I couldn't get past the forward. And he's like, nah, but that's the part you wrote. She's like, oh yeah, isn't it great? So obviously you can see Grace being a little self-absorbed, arrogant jerk, which is good because that she's supposed to be the villain, or at least she was supposed to be the villain, so she's sticking to her character. But you can see at the end, man, she rocks with Simon because she had a clear out. When he was trapped, she had the option of leaving the train, being 100% scot-free, but she went back for her homie and saved him. And once they get back to their feet and she ends up pulling him up from falling off the train, Simon's like, man, I owe you one. And she's like, dude, you owe me $1 million. So it's just those witty banter moments, those lines that you see between the characters. It's showcasing their friendship. And when you're writing a story or you're reading a story, one of the things that they say is, show, don't tell. And that's the most beautiful thing of showcasing a friendship between two characters, is that you can see that they're totally good friends through their dialogue. And they kind of did state that they were friends for a long time, although their age wasn't really 100% said. Grace is 15, 16, Simon's her age too. It's just You know they were friends since they were little kids, because they made a reference to Simon having sandals with socks on since 10 years old. So who knows, man? I mean, that's obviously arguable, but that was the whole main purpose of this episode. Basically, reintroduce the Apex, kind of show them off to be somewhat main protagonists, and showcase the big friendship that Grace and Simon have between each other, which is pretty cool, man. It's just like, it's cool to see these characters again. You can see Grace is being her manipulative self, and Simon is, I don't want to say he's a Sokka from Avatar: The Last Airbender. He's definitely not a Sokka, but he's kind of got the, I guess you could say, optimist personality of Sokka, the cool, laid-back personality of Sokka. So if there's anything you want to compare him to, it's kind of that. Although I feel like I'm kind of shitting on Sokka by doing that. But getting into my review portion of this episode, as I said, this episode wasn't a huge plot-heavy episode as, let's say, episode 8 from Infinity Train Season 2 was, the Wasteland episode. It wasn't anything big like that. It served as the main start of a new storyline, man. And the main purpose of it was to showcase Grace and Simon's closeness, which, like I said, I feel it did absolutely great. The banter between the two was absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, it wasn't anything, like I said, super great, but it served its purpose. It gave us a full story of how Grace and Simon are going to be ending up going on this adventure together to try to find the rest of the Apex. And you just got to give huge kudos to the, I guess you could say, fight scenes and the action scenes in general. Like I said, Grace in that goddamn harpoon pack, man, she uses that thing like it's a motherfucking extension of her body. Okay, she tosses that thing all around, and just to see how her and Simon whip across that motherfucker, it's dope. It's dope. It's a unique ability to her, and it just makes the episode seem way more actiony than it really was. So overall, I'm gonna have to hit this episode with a nice 7 out of 10. Like I said, wasn't a huge plot heavy episode. It wasn't anything super extraordinary. You know, it wasn't anything too monumental, but it did its job, man. It served its purpose, and that being starting up a new storyline for the Infinity Train franchise. So it wasn't anything, like I said, too monumental, but it did its job. And in my opinion, it did what it was supposed to do adequately. So my rating for this episode is a good 7 out of 10. But that's it, man. This is the Cartoon Kid, Ray Rollins, and we're on the Cartoon Kid channel where we talk cartoons, and we do it every other day, baby. This has been my review for Infinity Train Season 3, Episode 1, The Musical Car. Gonna be reviewing it the rest of the season throughout the next, I guess you could say, 2 weeks, just about. So, man, keep it tuned here, man. Tell me what you think about this episode. Tell me if you liked it. Tell me if you hate it. Tell me what you would rate it. Drop all your opinions down in the comments box below. And be sure, man, to check out my previous Infinity Train reviews coming up here on the screen. And until then, I will see y'all when I see y'all. Peace out, everybody.